then what are you? Social political stance of the church, you can see that. Church is not where I find community. Couldn't find a church that was welcoming. I mean, like, this is Church 101. And then I want to be more involved in living out God's calling in my life.
I didn't care if you ever came back.
Is it, those four in red are like what churches do. That's our mission. And they didn't find that. And they looked for other outlets for that. Be interesting on that online question. Be very interesting if these people find online faith communities or Facebook groups, that kind of stuff, that sustain their faith. I don't have that answer, but this is the group I would study because they do want to be involved, and they do want to sustain their spiritual life, and they do want to grow as a Christian. It's really interesting. Too much data. I'll come back to that later if we have time. This is the transmission piece. So this was my last big adaptive challenge. This is the work of Families in Faith. I really commend this book. It's a work of sociology, so you have to kind of get into a sociology language mindset. But it's a one-of-a-kind study. Vern Bankston is at the University of Southern California. 40 years ago, he identified a group of families that he stayed with for 40 years of research. This is never going to happen again. No one has that patience. Religiously diverse, economically diverse, ethnically diverse.
Wow.
Okay? He wrote about, his focus was, how does transmission happen from generation to generation? So how do you get religiously engaged, committed children, teens, and young adults? That was his question. So this is the outcome.
Wow.
Practice and belief, okay? This goes left to right. And what's so fascinating about it is, where we put a lot of effort and time in church is not the things that have the most impact on religious commitment and faith transmission. We're talking about Stephen Covey's line. Every organization is perfectly aligned to get the results it's getting. If you don't like the alignment, if you don't like the results, change the alignment. This is a slide about that for me. And we, by the way, no one's figured this out yet for 2016. We knew how this used to happen in the world in which ethnic traditions, neighborhood, and 3 generational households were doing it. And he notes that in the study. But it's changed. The most, how do I say it? Influential, but the most distant influence, contemporary culture, historical events, you know, like what happened after 9/11. People went back to church, lasted about 6 weeks. And then people went back to their normal practice. So, that kind of thing. Generational religious differences, people, we've already seen that. And the influence of peers. He says those have an influence, but they're out 4 steps removed from the core influence. Next on is us. Church, synagogue, temple activities, priests, ministers, rabbis, youth ministers, religious influence in school or college. The more, if you will, the more institutional. The close in, most direct influence are all family. Family heritage, parents role modeling, parent-child relationship, grandparents. Grandparents' impact, huge. In every religion and every group he studied. A religious tradition which the child is born into, very important, which means if you're born into one, it's a decisive factor toward socialization, but if you are not born into a tradition, you're also socialized into non-tradition. So in other words, you can be socialized into Christian faith or Lutheran faith or Catholic faith, or you can be socialized into non-affiliation. Socialization's always at work. Transmission's always at work. It's towards what end? Parents' church involvement. In all my days in youth ministry, the question I get the most would be, well, how come, if our youth program is so good, how come kids don't go to Sunday Mass? Because the only influence on Sunday worship participation is the modeling and participation of parents and grandparents. That's it. There isn't any other factor. If the family worships, the kids worship. Until third graders get driver's licenses, that's the only option you have. And then whether the parents were the same faith or mixed faith. I don't know what the numbers are for Lutherans, but half of all Catholics who get married in the church marry somebody other than Catholic. But only 1/3 of all baptized Catholics get married in a Catholic church. 2/3 do not. We make it really hard. Because the first question we ask when you come is, are you living together? Well, who isn't? And then it only goes downhill from there. So we ask all the right questions. If you never want to marry somebody, we have a whole set of questions to ask. But the problem from a religious socialization point, if you don't get married in the church, what's the chance you're going to bring your children to be baptized in the church or receive first? See, mainlines and Roman Catholic and Orthodox are life cycle churches. We want the life cycle to work for us. You get married in the church, you get baptized, you grow up in a Christian home, you receive First Communion, etc., etc., and that's the socialization process. I did a presentation to the National Catholic Family Life Ministry Group, which tends to be a little bit more traditional in their approach to family. I'm being as kind as I possibly can be. And so I said to them, if you want to really solve the dilemma of you have to marry more Catholics. It's just that simple. You got to marry, I don't care what they come with, you got to marry more people in church. It's just that simple. I felt like a Jewish rabbi making sure that both people getting married in my synagogue were Jewish. Okay? It's the same thing. So if you want faith transmission to really work, get married in a church and marry somebody of your same faith. The odds go up dramatically. But increasingly, the practicing Lutheran is marrying a non-affiliated. And it's usually the woman who's the practicing Lutheran and the guy who is the deadhead. It's true though. Family inheritance, grandparents, parents role modeling. So this is the modeling and teaching that comes with parenting. Their involvement in church, home prayer and instruction. The two biggest things from all the studies is reading the Bible and praying together. If you had to pick two, those are the two I'd invest in. Because those are the ones that were a little bit of a radical idea, right? Pray together and read the Bible. And the fact that parents model and live what they preach. And then the parent-child relationship quality. I thought this was interesting because we have a lot of theories of parenting. But they found that a particular parenting style was a conduit, a climate changer for passing on faith. And what they found was warm, authoritative, affirming, and open parents, as opposed to distant, cold, and authoritarian. I know it sounds obvious, but it's not. And the parents who are most open to letting their children explore tolerance for religious diversity found that those children were the most committed to their tradition. That's kind of an oxymoron. We want to pull you away from the culture and kind of surround you in a cocoon. The study found exactly the opposite.
You gotta go explore.
Explore, but always know you have what? A home base.
Exactly, you have a center.
Isn't this a fascinating study?
Yeah.
But what does it talk about? Value and religious transmission is primarily a family affair. So if you want to do one thing as a church, you can only do one thing, strengthen this at home. Don't create more programs at church. Just spend all your time with families. Help them resource them. Because if transmission's happening at home, you simply don't have enough time with people at church to do socialization and transmission. You can't do it in 30 hours a year. It's like one day plus 6 hours. And if you don't have moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas supporting that religious tradition and practice, you're in big trouble. The keys are inheritance, what we brought in, grandparents, role modeling, parent-child relationship. All of those are in our wheelhouse. We can commit to helping strengthen families, and if we do, sky's the limit. By the way, the reason why this comes as a news bulletin is for 100 years we got this for free. Nobody was running parenting classes in the 1950s and 60s or 40s. Why? Grandmas and grandpas lived upstairs or next door.
Or in your house.
Or right in the room next door. So what will these trends mean? Younger generations are more unaffiliated and less involved. Older generations are more affiliated and more involved and supportive, but beware, there's some of those are dones. We're going to have a generational transition. It's going to come in the next 10 to 15 years, and we're going to wake up one morning and go, oh my God. Which would be a prayer. Read the book of Lamentations a lot. Psalms are good for this too. As younger generations replace the older generations, there'll be fewer engaged and more affiliated if the trends continue the way they are now. Now, we're in the business of making sure those trends don't continue, but if left unattended and we do business as usual, this is what we're going to get. There'll still be a church, but it will be a shell of what it is today. Because I'm 65, 10,000 people in America turn 65 every single day. Even if our life expectancy is into our 80s, it just gives you a decade or more. The 80% that funds the church comes from my 20%. You're not getting it equally across the generations. And when a builder dies, the older adults, there's no replacement. One Catholic Stewardship Council study was fascinating. They were doing the replacement model. They said for every builder generation person who dies, you need 20 millennials to replace him or her financially. Well, that says everything to me. In terms of families, we're going to see declining levels of family religious transmission and faith practice as a result of non-affiliation, because first generation non-affiliates, the parents, are going to raise what? The second generation. I shared this story yesterday. I worked with a group of doing a workshop for school principals, Catholic school principals and teachers. And one of the principals in the groups, I was doing some of these numbers just a couple of years back, and she just lit up. She said, I noticed for over 4 or 5 years, I would always do the entrance interviews with parents and the children when they came into, I guess it was first grade. She said, I just noticed every year more and more of these Catholic parents had non-baptized children. She said, well, and I realized if we're going to make any difference, we had to start a Christian initiation program for families in the school to introduce, and in the case of the parents, reintroduce people to Catholicism. It's like the title of Marcus Borg's great book, Meeting Jesus Again for the First Time. That was her initiation process. She was adaptive, she rethought the role of the school, she's making a huge difference in the lives of those families. Huge. But this will continue unabated unless we intervene. And we should be in the business of intervening. We also see an increase in individualism, more focus on self, less on others in society. Well, just take a look at the primary season. Enough said. Religious affiliation is low when the culture is high in individualism and low in social support. So what? Religious affiliation goes down when there's more individualism. Increase in religious pluralism, questioning or minimizing of all faiths, and of course the increase in diversity makes our job much more complex. I talked about those. So, at the same time all that's going on, Pew writes the study and says, but religion and spirituality is not dead. Americans have become less religious by standard measures such as how important they say religion is to them, the frequency of religious service attendance, and prayer. So those would be who asked me about what criteria you use. Those are some of the questions they would ask to kind of get at that. But at the same time, the share of people across a wide variety of religious identities who say they often feel a deep sense of spiritual peace and well-being, as well as a deep sense of wonder about the universe, has gone up. Has gone up. 50 to 59 in 7 years, or 52, that's huge. 39 to 48, huge. So spirituality, you can't bottle up the hunger for spirituality, relationships, community, awe, wonder, and creation. If you've read N.T. Wright's book, Simply Christian, if you haven't, it's a great read. But he starts his book, even though he didn't intend to write it this way, he starts his book with 4 echoes of a voice. And the hunger for justice, spirituality, relationships, creation. Richard Florey says religion is not going away anytime soon. Regardless of how people may identify themselves, but business as usual among existing religious institutions will not stem the losses we are seeing. In my own tradition, we try to hunker down. We thought the problem was that the textbooks weren't Catholic enough, so now we're taking care of that problem. We thought that the problem was that we weren't using the right words at Sunday Mass. We're taking care of that problem. And the numbers keep going down. You can't have a technical fix for a huge adaptive challenge. Even though technical fixes are easier, we know how to do them, they're in our wheelhouse, we can check them off our to-do list, they're much easier. All right, take a deep breath. That's the world in an hour and a half. All right, I'll get to the education stuff to start the afternoon. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? Oh my God, any of the above.
We got to start meeting. We got to start collaborating, meeting.
Yeah, there's no, I think we've gone through an era, the last 10 or 15 years, in which, in our own different areas, we've made efforts to get at these from our own angles. The dilemma is, you can't fix the youth problem without a systemic change. Okay? You can't fix the no one's going to Sunday worship problem without a systemic shift. You can't educate the whole community lifelong unless you make a systemic change. It's just not possible. Because the old models, no matter how good they once were, weren't built for this world. So when people say, my textbook's not working, my program's not working, my Sunday worship's not working, the rest, I say, but they were all created in the 20th century. We now live in the 21st century. In fact, we're 16 years into the 21st century. And you're not going to get 100 years to adapt. You're not. You're not. In a prior era, you could have gotten a century. You're not going to get a century. You're going to get 5, 4, 6 years.
When I look at the decline of the church, and I have to also step back and look at the context in which that the church has existed through the centuries. I mean, it goes back beyond the 20th century. So the church is no longer seen as a moral authority. All you have to do is go back to the doctrine of discovery to ascertain that much information. And so then when we talk about, and too often the work of justice has been assigned to a committee. And so when we talk about systemic change, I think we also need to talk about a deep looking inward to ascertain exactly what do we have to offer. It's just too romantic to say, well, we have the gospel of Jesus Christ. But yeah, but so what? I mean, I'm as passionate as anybody about Jesus in this room. I'll match my passion to anyone in this room. But so what? What good has the church offered to a world that is in so much pain? And in a nation, so-called Christian nation, that has had so much wrong been perpetrated. So that has to be in the mix as well. And that you have nibbled around the edges of it, you know, but I really think that is such a huge and critical piece that if it isn't put out there, we're going to end this day with some ideas for strategies and never encounter our own souls.
Oh, agreed. I mean, part of the reimagining is reimagining like message, our approach to the world and the culture. I mean, it's like like I'm pulling on certain pieces of this,
yes, you are.
but the bigger systems changes. I'll give you an example. So I struggle oftentimes, and this is a struggle within Roman Catholicism, and it's being played out with this Pope, because he's able to represent a whole approach to the culture that for us is reflective of the very last document that the Church in the Modern World document from the Second Vatican Council, which was a church that embraced the world, its hungers, its joys, its sorrows, are ours hungers, joys, and sorrows.
Yes.
You know, so it's the one that really launched, affirmed this outreach to the world, this advocacy for justice, this action for transformation. But there's also other approaches to the culture, which are, it's a bad place out there, so we need to move back in. It's really funny to think about Niebuhr's categories, Richard Niebuhr's categories of Christ above, Christ within, Christ culture. It's still applicable, okay? Diana Butler Bass's new book, Grounded, this is a great read, by the way. She reframes the question, and she said, this is why Pope Francis gets in trouble, by the way. The old question was, who is God? And for 500 years, we battled with each other to answer that question. My answer is better than your answer. She said, today's the question is, where is God?
Yeah.
So I'll be, you know, I'll play my parochial league for a minute and say, it's so fascinating when this Pope goes to another country, who he visits and where he finds God. And the challenge for all of us is, how do we answer the question today, where is God? Not where is the church,
Right.
where is God? And that, so when I look at families, I say, God's there. And the ups and downs, the struggles, the joys, God's already there. So it's a kind of theological stance towards, where is God in our world, in our struggles, in our joys? Okay. And how do we get about being with where God is and what God is doing? I think that shift towards the culture, towards the people, opens the church up.
Mm-hmm. It could.
And well, yes, but it changes, it fundamentally changes the way we think about church, community, mission, stance towards the culture. It's all part of this big systems change. And so when we look at families, the spiritual but not religious, we look at them through the lens of, where is God? What is God doing out in the world? And how do we get on that page?
Yeah.
So how can I be doing what God is already doing?
And having that be such a priority.
Yes. But it means there's a lot of things, so we should be really good at this, especially coming into the Holy Week season. What are we willing to allow to die so new things can be born?
Amen.
We are Saturday between Friday and Sunday. It's Saturday.
I see that, sure.
That's where we are.
That's
We
the
know
hope.
what's dying.
That's the hope.
We know what's dying, but we don't know what's being born yet. And the question is, how do you live on Saturday? So People say, you know, you do church work and religion, it must be pretty boring. I think it could be more interesting and exciting because we live in Saturday. I'd much rather live in a time when the system opens up, either on its own accord because the culture is forcing it to say, how do we reimagine, re-envision? It's one of those moments.
I agree with Inez, but I think it's even more basic than that. People come into our churches and they don't see how Christ is transforming us. You know, we have these cliques that are fighting over things like the color of the carpet, and people are thinking, this is crazy.
Yeah.
This is crazy. So I think it's just a basic thing on how we treat each other as Christians. And when I go out and talk, I say, people are expecting us to be different, not perfect, but different. There should be something different about us. And I don't think people are seeing that.
And I think you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And because I'm a faith formation guy, I look at that and say, this is about how do we equip, how do we empower, how do we do faith formation that equips us to be those ambassadors of God and to live that? I mean, what's happened in the mainline, even Roman Catholic world, is we have really devalued the educational ministries because we got locked into a model called Sunday school. And you've seen how that's transformed.